Hello. Sorry I've not made really any videos this past week. I had a friend that comes down once a year from Jersey, and I was visiting with him for a few days. Kind of went around to a few different places. He himself can't wait to move away from New Jersey because of high taxes, property taxes, well, every tax imaginable, I suppose. Kind of odd that it turns out that I know all these people in Jersey. I've never really seen New Jersey. I spent a couple nights there in a hotel once when I was going to a Photo Plus convention, but I never got to see it. People seem very down to earth. They don't like the taxes, but and they consider them to be evil, which of course taxes are evil. This video is about evil. I keep getting asked about evil, especially in live stream. But it's like they have a glutton for punishment. They keep putting people in that want to oppress them. One of the discoveries in the book of Revelation is this word, the exousios. People find it fascinating, get asked about it all the time, and it is the case both in Pali and Sanskrit and Greek and Latin that some words are actually numbers, especially in Greek. Letters equal numbers, and the word for excess in all forms of ancient metaphysics is evil. Evil is excess, excess is evil. The number of man is evil. It is true that there are two within us, and there is always an internal struggle. This is an ancient paradigm. It's been parroted by Jakob Böhme, Meister Eckhart, Greek monistic metaphysics, Pythagorean, Indian, Advaita Vedanta, principal Upanishads, on the original Nikayas, on and on and on. This is, of course, the inner struggle. The self is at war with whatever is not the self. And this is, of course, where we get the eternal struggle. Actually condensing things down to make things really easy, because, life is really short. I don't have a wife or kids. But I mean, life is short regardless, and I can't stand reading 100 pages to find 2 sentences of salient information, so I'm going to try to make this video really short and simple regarding evil. Access, of course, is modulation, no different than it pertains frequency. It's feeding something that is insatiable. There's that old saying, spreading yourself thin. Well, spreading yourself thin is excess. Some people will love something, a particular materialistic item, whatever that may be. It's like, well, I love this thing so much, I enjoy it so much, I enjoy owning it so much. Better than one is two, and why not 3 or 4? It's okay if you're actually doing that as an investment, especially if something is very valuable, it's going to go up in price, you buy a bunch of them as an investment to pay the bills. But this type of excess, you're not going to take it with you. I'm not going to take it with me. And the ancient Egyptians, of course, buried all sorts of treasures in the tombs. I'd love to go back in time and talk with them about that. A lot of that probably was symbolic, not that they thought these dead bodies were enjoying these artifacts in the afterlife, because of course they weren't. The ancient Egyptians were far too intelligent for that. Anyway, excess is modulation. Of course, modulation is embodiment. No radio on Earth can tune a signal without modulation, i.e. a set frequency. It's completely impossible. It wouldn't be a signal by definition. It wouldn't be EMR. It would be completely untunable. This is the reason and the answer to super high energy light. It's a spherical frequency. A spherical frequency can't be modulated. However, ironically, the spherical frequency that makes up matter and the materialistic items that we praise can have harmonics which tune in a signal. Most famously, of course, is water. So you have a spherical frequency that forms the specific geometric structures in the case of water, and that, of course, is the antenna for the manifestation of consciousness, i.e. embodiment, which, of course, equals time, suffering, delusion, and pain. This, of course, is spreading yourself thin. Evil, of course, this is a fake fire, feeding this fire for eternity. Hell is just underneath this world. True definition of hell would be like a skipping record that goes over and over and over again, the same spot of your fears, desires, angers, and they call them hungry ghosts in ancient Pali. You know, they have this insatiable desire, which of course transcends life and death, and it continues on after the disjoinment between matter and spirit, which of course is what death is. Death is not the opposite of life, it's the ending of life. Life, of course, is the consubstantiality of matter and spirit. Hell is just underneath this world, like a skipping, broken record. It's just the realm right underneath this world. People try to contact other beings underneath this world, but the realm right underneath this one is literally the definition of hell. There's no wise or helpful being that exists underneath this one. And it's like complaining about finding no honest, reliable, or good person when you're toward to hang out on death row of a prison, for example. I can't find any decent people down here. These are all crooks, scammers, murderers, and the lying, thieving, and they're the most manipulative too. It's one of the key features of these evil people that, of course, that are manipulative. I've kind of most of my life isolated myself, and I have a very intuitive, genuine intuition about someone and how evil they are, even before they say anything. They actually do emit something. They have an aura around them, and I don't want to scare the normies or talk about highly esoteric stuff. But people need to trust their guts a whole lot more. We're going to talk about the metaphysics of evil, because people keep asking about this in a live chat stream, and they want discussions, and they requested a video on that topic. Even though I've done a couple, I'd like to expand on that in a peripheral sense. Like if someone were to be unintelligent and they were to become ingenious, this person, by becoming a genius, is no longer himself. This thing perpetually in flux, the psychophysical persona non grata, the thing that you see in the mirror, is the adversary, but it's not an adversary to fight, but one not to identify with. It's unfortunate that people make friends with and identify with that thing in the mirror. It distorts them and it ruins them internally, as if a puppet master were to fall in love with his puppet, that he's been animating for so long. He's completely immersed himself. The best ventriloquists in the world, as it turns out, and I heard this from a ventriloquist, a master ventriloquist, I forget his name. It's not that current guy with those crazy dolls, that current famous ventriloquist, but an older one, is that they actually all day long, virtually every day, pretend to be this doll, and they express and feel, even though they can't literally feel anything. They project themselves into this wooden or plastic contraption, and that's why they're the best ventriloquists. They're not literally pulling the strings and throwing their voice. They animate them the best because they are almost literally partially embodied into that thing. They've given it life. If you ever watched a true ventriloquist, you really think that doll or that piece of plastic or wood is alive. And the only way these people do this is they've made a talisman out of wood and or plastic. And this is what every human being unfortunately does. This is the internal struggle that, of course, is the evil and the excess of modulation, not of material possessions only, but also, too, a different type of materialism, which is spoken about not by anybody today, but the spiritual materialism of false identity, the internal struggle between the two selves. Every branch of ancient metaphysics speaks of two selves, the transcendent self and the immanent self which is in perpetual flux. The ancient Pali for the immanent self is equated to the phases of the moon, the waxing and the waning of the moon. And the moon is called in ancient Pali the king of Attabhava. Attabhava, Pali, Atta means Atman, or self-becoming. In other words, perpetual waxing and waning. It's never fixed at all, like the sun. Of course, the sun transits across the sky, but the sun itself is unmoving from the aspect of metaphysical symbolism. So, anyway, as a man becomes a genius, he's no longer himself. He's somebody completely transformed, but that is the external persona non grata. The soul, of course, can only be immortalized by returning to its source, i.e. the ending of modulation, in the case of frequency analogy. What if, of course, is modulated is itself not modulation, rather epiphenomena. All of us are fascinated by phenomena, as people are fascinated by the fire. We feed the fire, it keeps us warm, it staves off animals, but what's the definition of hell? It would be perpetually feeding the fire, which can never be satiated. It is a bottomless pit. Evil is not the doing of evil. An ignorant person with no pre-context of mind, or a child, will do something that is evil. Evil is not the act of evil, rather the love of evil. And from the aspect of absolutist metaphysics, due to the ignorance of an evil being, which of course a disembodied being that loves evil is demonstrably what we call a demon. I'm not interested in Judeo-Christian appellations regarding a demon, but just a disembodied being who is in love with evil. They're trying to approach the absolute from the other side of the spectrum, the wrong side of the spectrum, in the destruction of phenomena, the praise of darkness. But darkness is not a thing. Darkness is absence of light. These people that do evil are always at war with the existential self, but the existential self is inanimate matter. You can't make war with that, and they do destroy it. And of course we see evil deeds performed all over the world virtually every month now, people doing evilness where they attack and lash out at phenomena. Unfortunately, as long as there's identification, this of course causes spiritual harm. There are very few people that have come completely disjointed with the physical, and they are what is called a dead man walking, or a dead person walking. In other words, they're still alive, but they're alive not to that puppet, but rather to the transcendent. So these people are working from the other end rather than trying to cleave towards the light and follow natural order. They are at war with, and let's face it, from both aspects, phenomena are in flux, they're under destruction. When you cleave to it, you suffer, just as this fire will burn you. Just as, the self is never in any fixed point, it's always under flux. Anything that is privy to birth is subject to old age, sickness, and death. And they are at war, and they're fighting the wrong end of the spectrum. This is the nature of their primordial ignorance, wherein which they are in love with evil, but they're fighting the wrong thing. Wisdom, of course, is just a ridiculous English word to refer to self-proximity. Self-proximity, of course, is transcendence. What would then the obvious antithesis of wisdom be? Avidya, or agnosis, the love of shadows and phenomena, but having enough intelligence to realize that this stuff is in transit, and then you have war with it. By the way, if you think, and this is a perfect reference in many different Judeo-Christian texts, as well as in the Zohar, as well as the Upanishad, and the Rig Veda, as I recall, and certainly in more. But two examples of Gautama and Mara. Mara is just a Pali word for Satan, which means adversary. And the adversary is not something ab extra to the self. Or in Matthew book 10, where Jesus is tempted in the desert, and he tells Jesus to jump off the cliff, and if he does, God will send his angels to keep him from being smashed on the rocks. And of course the answer is, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. And there's some more temptation. Religion, and the profanity of religion itself, and I'm not interested in going after religion, is that it literalizes these things. There is not some sort of ab extra entity. However, it is ab extra, but not in the absolutist sense, like, well, here's Satan or here's the devil, it's a different thing. There are two selves within us, and by the way, the one comes closer to wisdom, the greater the polarization there is. People that are most content, people that do horrific and evil things, they do sleep well, generally. They are not at odds with themselves. They have made bedfellows and love mates with evil. They are not in conflict. It is true of Christianity or any religion or any true metaphysician, a true sannyasin, which is basically a super guru. Not that that would be more accurate, but a sannyasin. These people are in conflict with themselves. Wisdom, i.e. self-proximity, causes polarization. This temptation of Christ from Matthew, Book 10, and some other places, and Gautama being tempted by Mara, are not meant to be taken literally. They are not literal. However, people keep reading it, and preachers and priests and the Pope and on. They keep saying that, well, Jesus was tempted by Satan. And that, no, that's not the case. This was the internal struggle between the transcendent self and the psychophysical self. Just as consciousness, by the way, is the consubstantiality of matter and spirit, that is the lesser or lower self, which has a beginning in time and an end in time, and that is the adversary. That is the excess, because it is the excess that is the modulation of the signal. The signal without modulation, in the radio analogy, or EMR, is a signal without modulation, which wouldn't be a signal denotatively. It would be true rest. It would be true peace. It would be true transcendence. It would be the definition of the culmination of wisdom, at which point, of course, all desire and all conflict is gone. This is a dead man walking, and not that any Christian would want to hear it, but the struggle between supposedly Satan and Jesus in the desert in Matthew 10 is not a different being, rather the internal conflict between the psychophysical self and the transcendent self. Psychophysical self, its soul, would be in Pali would be vijnana. By the way, is no different than saying avidya or agnosis. It is prefixal vi and jnana. Jnana is a Pali word meaning gnosis. It is literally the dark light or the evil self within oneself that must be conquered by the culmination of wisdom, which of course is self-proximity. But the wiser one becomes until wisdom is fulfilled. There is that evil wherein there is polarization. Unlike an evil person or a genuinely ignorant person, there is no distinction between the transcendent self and the immanent self, i.e. the worldly self. They are both one. And these people do sleep well. They have no internal conflict at all. The wiser one becomes, the more there is polarization between these two. And then it becomes almost literally, even though it is not literally, the conflict between the transcendent and, of course, the immanent. So this idea of Gautama and Mara, or Jesus and Satan, it is true, and it has been said, of course, that the kingdom of heaven is within you, right? Well, then, necessitatively, of course, it is also true, then, that it must also be undeniably true that the war of heaven, or the war in heaven, spoken about, is also, too, within you. I've told people for decades that there is a genuine danger of wisdom. People get just enough wisdom such that there's polarization, and then you have this close proximity yet polarization between the immanent self and the transcendent self, and it has destroyed a lot of people because they don't take it to its natural fruition. It is better, and I hate to say this because it's almost a blasphemous and a Pythagorean sin to say this. It is better to be ignorant and lead a peaceful life than it is to become partially wise and have a polarized self where you start to see yourself ab extra from this, but not have enough wisdom, to bring it to fruition. What's the fruition of true polarization? It would be no different than the harmonic of spherical frequency in the case of super high energy light, for example. You have stability, of course. Can't take that analogy too far because matter itself does not last a perdurable eternity. Relative to human life, of course, it does, but as, of course, one becomes into this world, the less proximity to the light one is, of course, such that objectivity is overthrowing one's nature, i.e. the inherent self. Evil is not the doing of evil. However, of course, the result is the same. I'm not arguing that, obviously so. Rather, the love of evil. Wisdom says that you must ascend through disobjectification. This is THEURGY. This is also called apophaticism, neti neti, via negativa. People don't understand that. There's a reason why I'm writing a booklet about that. But from the perspective of an evil and ignorant individual, they are at fight with this phenomena. They are at fight against all phenomena. They love darkness, but darkness is not a thing. Darkness is an absence of light. from the inverted perspective of the evil which is ignorance and the ignorance which breeds evil. From, just as a delusional person, has highly irrational and insane reasoning. It's like, why are you doing that? This makes no sense to anybody with any wisdom. From their perspective, it does. From their perspective of evil, having a fight against the light is rational. It is completely wrong, but from that perspective of materialism, but ultimately spiritual materialism, that evil to them is the right thing. All throughout history, we see this evil where people have externalized the internal struggle between the immanent self and the transcendent self, and they want to destroy all the evil phenomena they see before it. But that phenomena, which of course is transitory, is precious, as any life is precious, of course. They destroy it, they obliterate it, they do horrific evils. From their sick mind, and of course their minds are sick, they're attacking that which is ultimately to be transcended, but they're going about it completely bass-backwards, upside down, and antithetical to wisdom. They're attacking the phenomena rather than eliminating out the primordial attribute which causes embodiment and therefore is to be transcended, i.e. the immanent self, from the transcendent self and the wisdom and the polarization. But that's the long path. That's the correct path, and it's the only true path to transcendence. But I do know why, these evil entities do evil and attack phenomena. Phenomena is to be rejected, transcended, see it for what it is, but there is no wisdom, there's no natural order, there's nothing noble in going after phenomena. And by saying attacking phenomena, going after phenomena, these are the things that a simple mind of any normal human being sees as doing evil acts, doing evil deeds. It would be like somebody being mad at, say, some sort of... My two friends were killed by a particular pharmaceutical in the hospital. The hospitals, they ended my two friends' life. It starts with the R, the pharmaceutical. It would be me to do an evil deed to, like, go after, this pharmaceutical, starts with an R. It's like, no, there's an enormous amount of evil that came down that was... Then you had mandates of people to give it to people, and this caused failure of all sorts of organs and whatnot. It's going the complete bass-backwards way. You're blaming inanimate phenomena and natural order, because embodiment is part of natural order. It can't be gone about that way. This ignorance manifests into evil, and they end up attacking it. But from their perspective, and I'm not defending evil at all, no way, but from the perspective of their ignorance and them seeing with just enough wisdom, the nature of phenomena, attacking phenomena, going after phenomena in these evil acts and deeds, and of course the desires and hates and fears and hungers of be they embodied beings or disembodied beings, because hell is right underneath this world. Yeah, it's just the disembodied beings like a skipping record, and eventually the skipping record eventually dissipates. It doesn't last forever and ever and ever. The notion of burning in hell without actually having a physical body is just so completely laughable, but the mind can make a heaven out of hell and a hell out of heaven. So one does not have to have a body to experience the hells of desires, fears, hungers, hatred, so on and so forth. But this is the metaphysics of monistic evil as understood, in short, in a nutshell, from the perspective of the monistic Platonists, Pythagoreans, Plotinus, Numenius, Syrianus, Damascus, on and on and on, to understand what evil is. It is excess. But it's not excess itself. You can't say that you're evil because you have a lot of stuff and a lot of excess. It's the desire and attachments, on and on and on and on, which are of avidya, agnosis, that is within somebody and the internal struggle therein, that you cleave to these excesses. This is, of course, spiritual materialism. Having a bunch of stuff doesn't make you evil or a materialist. Necessitatively is usually indicative of it, but evil is something far, far more finer than that. I hope I made this simple and kind of kept it short and explained some of the finer nuances of evil that people have been asking me about in the live stream. I hope you have a lovely week. And sorry I've been absent for the past few days, but I was busy. A buddy came from New Jersey, so we're hanging out and going places and stuff. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.